Hey, teachers, welcome. You're listening to Prep for Life Prep podcast with me, Brother Lawson, Brother Wing. Hey, Brother Wing.
Hey,
Today, hey, today is section uh or lesson 170, Scripture Study Skills. Here, your students will be introduced to the idea of studying the scriptures, looking for something.
that's a whoa, that sounds cool.
Sounds
We should
familiar.
do that every day.
Teachers, if you are doing scripture feasting in your classes, this is going to be a pretty good review for your students. Teachers, if you're not doing scripture feasting with your classes, you should teach this lesson and then start doing scripture feasting with your classes. Or if you have a parent or priesthood leader that doesn't think the student should be reading scriptures in seminary, you could have them teach this lesson. So this is a promotional lesson for scripture feasting. This is, if you can't tell already, these lessons are going to be Brother Wing and I, some of our favorites in the life prep ones. Being big fans of the scriptures that we are. So, what are we going to do in this life prep? What are we going to do to prep for this life prep lesson?
Okay, with most of the videos that you'll see in the teacher manual, they could be used at the beginning to kind of draw interest into the feasting that we're going to do. Or they could be used kind of supplementarily, like later as you kind of build your discussion, and say, hey, well, check out this video now, and use it there. So this parable of the gems video, really the middle part from like minute 2 to minute 4, like you can use that at the beginning and then say, okay, let's do this now. So that's one way to do it, or it might be used later. But I like it. It's a great video, and it helps the students to kind of grasp this idea that the scriptures have great value there, and we want to investigate and really dig into the scriptures. Now, if you've been doing scripture feasting, and then they're like, yeah, duh, this is what we do every day. But it might still be cool to read that. Now, if you skip to the define heading in the lesson manual content there, um, here's a really cool thing: learning to identify doctrines and principles. And then it says you can practice the following important steps whenever you're studying scriptures to help you identify gospel truths. Now, check this out.
Hold on, teachers.
Read slowly and carefully, look for stated truths, look for implied truths, write in your own words what you found, ponder why the truth is important to you. And then maybe we could say step 6 is to share that with the rest of the class
Right.
if you feel, like that's appropriate to do. And so that is, teachers, a fantastic another way to feast on the scriptures and provide in-class scripture study. So you can use the bookmark any day, probably with scripture feasting. You could use these
Right.
5 steps any day with any section in the Doctrine and Covenants or chapter in the Standard Works. So this is another go-to possible scripture feasting idea that you can use anytime. Love it. Try it with this particular lesson experience that the students are going to have. You could do that with, and you could just pick a random chapter and say, hey, here's 5 steps. Try this out with section so and so in the Doctrine and Covenants, or this chapter in the Book of Mormon. Or you could use what they do in section 18 to practice looking for stated and implying truths. By the way, one more thing: section 3, verses 1 through 10 is a great place to look for stated truths. Like, you don't adjust the language of scripture at all, just look for a statement that's true. Section 3, verses 1 through 10. You want to practice implied truths where you have to adjust the words to kind of pull out a sentence of truth. Go to section 10, verses 1 through 5. And those two sections obviously go together, so it might be kind of cool to do it that way. But section 10, verses 1 through 5, they can, like, what's it basically teaching? What's the moral of the story? Kind of thing. If they're having trouble with the formulating a sentence, then the guidelines for evaluating truths down in the supplementary part, that's a pretty cool evaluation, because sometimes students do make a hey, I learned this from the scriptures, and you as a teacher are like, that's not actually true. So you're like, what do I do here? And so like, well, look at this section here, guidelines for valuing truth. What do we see? Let's kind of massage that statement a little bit.
I like the quote by Elder Holland, and again, I'd never just read the quote to your students, let them see it, but I like to maybe have a short discussion with your students about this quote and ask them questions about, when Elder Holland talks about examining every word and every scriptural gem, what does that look like? Why is that difficult to do? What happens when we do it? When have you ever looked at a and examined every word and thought about it? What difference did it make? And so I really like that, and that's a great quote for our students to remember about scripture study is they might feel like it's something they want to hurry and get through, like I read my chapter for the night or whatever. That's not the type of scripture reading that Elder Holland's talking about. He's talking about a much different level of scripture study where we're not worried about making sure we get credit for a class, or we're not worried about making sure we keep our New Year's resolution, but we are examining every word and looking for these gems. So that's a good quote, I think, to emphasize on this lesson. All right. All right. Teachers, love your guts. Stay righteous.